Enigmatic phenomena have haunted humanity throughout history, defying explanations and leaving us with more questions than answers. The Osage Murders, a story of betrayal, justice, and resilience. Today, Untold Chronicles delves into the chilling sage of the Osage Nation, where a lottery of black gold unleashed a reign of violence that continues to echo today. Section 1. A Nation of Riches, a Wave of Terror. Deep in the heart of Oklahoma lies the ancestral land of the Osage Nation. For millennia, these resilient people thrived in a vibrant ecosystem, their lives woven into the fabric of the land. However, their story is not one of uninterrupted peace. In the 19th century, the U.S. government forced the Osage people from their traditional homelands onto a reservation in what is now Oklahoma. This forced relocation marked a significant disruption to their way of life.
The Osage were a Digihus-Siouan people with a rich cultural heritage. They lived a semi-sedentary lifestyle, relying on hunting buffalo, deer, and other wild game. They also practiced sophisticated agricultural techniques, cultivating crops like corn, beans, and squash. A unique aspect of their society was the concept of head rights, where each Osage citizen received a share of tribal land and resources. Under the Osage Allotment Act of 1906, all subsurface minerals within the Osage Nation reservation became tribally owned and held in trust by the U.S. government. Head rights determined how much oil revenue each Osage person received.
Life for the Osage was centered around community and tradition. Social structures were complex, with extended families forming the core unit. Spiritual beliefs played a vital role, with ceremonies and rituals honoring the natural world and their ancestors. However, the greatest disruption came in the early 20th century with the discovery of vast oil reserves beneath Osage land. This black gold transformed their lives overnight. Section 2. A Descent into Darkness. In 1923, at the height of the Osage oil boom, the Osage tribe earned more than $30 million in revenue, thanks to the head rights system. Wealth poured into the Osage Nation, making them some of the richest individuals in the United States.
The discovery of oil presented a unique challenge for the Osage Nation. Their traditional way of life was based on a deep connection to the land and a concept of communal ownership. Suddenly, they were thrust into a world of individual wealth and a capitalist economy.
A dream turned nightmare. Even the Osage's blessings turned out to be a curse. The great wealth lured not only outlaws and criminals, but also fueled resentment. Newspapers reported on the Osage's newfound wealth, sparking national discussions about their financial situation. Prejudice and racism led to calls for government intervention, supposedly to protect the Osage from themselves. Section 3. A system rigged against them. The U.S. government, fueled by prejudice and a desire to control Osage wealth, implemented a system rooted in racism. The Osage Allotment Act of 1906 divided tribal land into individual allotments, making it easier for outsiders to acquire it. Furthermore, a 1921 law required full-blooded Osage members to prove competency with money before managing their own finances. This opened the door for the appointment of white guardians, many of whom were corrupt and self-serving.
The system of guardianship was deeply flawed. Many guardians saw their role as an opportunity for personal gain, exploiting the Osage people's lack of experience with managing large sums of money. Guardians often charged exorbitant fees, made bad investments, and even pocketed some of the money themselves.
Osage women, who held positions of power and wealth within their society, became particular targets. White men, eager to gain access to Osage oil money, saw marriage as a way in. Intermarriage rates soared, with some Osage women facing harassment and even threats if they refused such proposals. A descent into terror. This exploitation reached a horrifying peak with the Reign of Terror, a period from 1921 to 1926 marked by violence against the Osage people. Estimates vary, but scores, perhaps hundreds, of Osage men, women, and children were murdered during this time. Methods ranged from shootings and bombings to poisoning. Margie Burkhart shares the personal impact of this violence.
The wealth that came from the oil made us targets. My great-aunt Minnie, then Anna, then Lizzie. all gone by 1923, victims of poisoning. It felt like a relentless nightmare. The murders were part of a broader scheme. By the end of that period, my grandmother Molly and her 2 children were the only survivors in their immediate family. We grew up in a household filled with stress and depression. The legacy of that violence runs deep.
A broken system. Local law enforcement, often complicit or influenced by those with money and power, failed to investigate these crimes seriously. Many murders went unsolved, and the perpetrators faced no consequences. The Osage people lived in fear, with no one to protect them. Section 4. The Fight for Justice. Desperate for justice, the Osage Nation sent representatives to Washington, D.C. They appealed to President Calvin Coolidge and the fledgling Bureau of Investigation, later renamed the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover, eager to establish the FBI's reputation, took on the case.
The Osage Murders were a defining moment for the FBI. It was a complex case, requiring undercover work and meticulous investigation. While Hoover's leadership had its flaws, the Bureau's involvement ultimately brought some perpetrators to justice and exposed the corruption plaguing the Osage Nation.
The investigation faced significant challenges. Local corruption was rampant, and witnesses were often intimidated or unwilling to speak out. However, the FBI agents displayed remarkable dedication, working undercover and building trust with the Osage community. Section 5. Unveiling the Mastermind. A web of deceit began to unravel as the investigation progressed. One crucial element was the use of informants. The Bureau utilized informants, some with checkered pasts, to infiltrate the criminal networks involved. These informants provided vital information on the killings and the people behind them. The investigation led to the doorstep of William K. Hale, a wealthy rancher and prominent local businessman. Hale, known as the King of the Osage Hills, had used his influence and wealth to orchestrate a series of killings. He targeted Osage individuals with oil head rights, often marrying into the families or manipulating those closest to the victims.
It was surreal. My father brought Ernest to our house when I was a teenager. He looked so harmless, slight with fluffy white hair and bright blue eyes. It was hard to reconcile his appearance with the fact that he had helped destroy entire families, including ours.
The revelation that family members, like Margie Burkhart's grandfather, Ernest Burkhart, were involved, added another layer of complexity and pain to the tragedy. He, along with others, had been manipulated and coerced by Hale's promises of wealth and power. Section 6. A Quest for Closure. The investigation ultimately resulted in arrests and convictions. Hale and his accomplices faced trial, but the justice system wasn't perfect. Sentences were light, and many believed those involved got off easy. The Osage Murders may not have received the national attention they deserved, but they marked a turning point for the FBI and the fight for justice for indigenous people in the United States. However, for the Osage Nation, the quest for closure continues.
My father, James, nicknamed Cowboy, was just a boy when his father, Ernest, was involved in the murders. This betrayal left him deeply wounded. He struggled with anger and violence, a constant tension in our home. Even as a child, the murders cast a long shadow. Dad would point out locations where our relatives were killed, a constant reminder of the tragedy. As I grew older, I learned more about the racism and greed behind the killings. The weight of this history settled on me. My grandmother Molly, ostracized by the community, lost her extended family. Their pain became my own. Therapy helped me understand how deeply the trauma affected me. The sadness and fear it caused are burdens I carry, worried about passing them on to future generations. We carry the weight of this history, but we also carry the strength of our ancestors. Sharing our stories ensures such injustices are never forgotten.
Margie's story is a powerful reminder of the enduring impact of the Osage Murders. The trauma resonated not only within families, but also within the Osage Nation as a whole. The violence and fear created a chilling atmosphere, leading some Osage families to abandon their homes and relocate within the reservation or even leave the area altogether.
The Reign of Terror had a devastating impact on the Osage Nation's social fabric. However, it also catalyzed unity and resilience. The community came together to support survivors and rebuild their lives.
The Osage Nation actively sought justice for the victims. They lobbied Congress and pushed for a more robust investigation, paving the way for reforms within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Despite the trauma, the Osage Nation persevered. They adapted to the changing world, embracing education and economic opportunities while holding fast to their cultural heritage. The Osage story is not just about the past, it carries profound lessons for the present. The fight for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIW, continues today, echoing the struggles of the Osage women during the Reign of Terror.
The brutal targeting of Osage women in the 1920s has chilling parallels to the modern-day epidemic of MMIW. These contemporary cases raise troubling questions about ongoing issues of violence against Indigenous communities and the lack of resources to address them.
The Osage Nation's fight for justice continues to inspire movements for MMIW. Their story reminds us that the struggle for equality and safety for all Indigenous people is far from over. The story of the Osage Murders is not just a historical tragedy, it's a call to action. We must learn from the past and ensure that all communities, especially Indigenous people, have access to justice and protection. The Osage story is a powerful reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing, and the pursuit of truth, no matter how long it takes, is essential. Join us next time as we delve into the chilling disappearance of the lost colony of Roanoke. What happened to these English settlers who vanished without a trace? Tune in to find the truth.